Hey everyone, RogueGold here. Welcome back to the Division 2. Today, I've got the guide for Year 8 Season 2 Into the Dark. In this, we are not just going to be covering how this season's modifiers work, not just how the PVE Dark Zone works, but how they intertwine together and everything in between. This is the most connected we've ever seen a modifier set be to a seasonal activity, so there are a lot of important mechanics and details to cover within that. So if you've played the new season and ran into any confusion with how to farm, the PVE DZ, what the toxicity debuffs are that you are receiving, how the modifiers work, where you trade in resources, what builds to run, by the end of this, we'll tackle all of it. So, timestamps are down below to skip around to whichever section you may need. If you find this helpful and you want to see more in the future from myself on the Division, then be sure to subscribe. A major shout out and thank you to all of our channel members as always. Thank you so much for your support in me, allowing me to continue making these videos. It's truly a joy. But we have a lot to cover, so let's get to it. Okay, so we are more or less going to be walking through this sequentially. I want to begin with what I recommend you do right when logging into the new season in order to maximize your time and begin progressing through objectives. And then, as we go on, we'll get into greater depth and begin layering more stuff. So, the very first step that I recommend to getting started in this season is going in and completing Journey Chapter 2. This one should be accessible automatically right alongside Chapter 1. It's comprised of fairly basic game-wide objectives, and the reason for doing this is that Journey 2 not only grants you access to your 3 active modifiers for the season, but completing it will automatically unlock chapters 3 through 5. Those can all be progressed simultaneously, and they also contain PVE Dark Zone specific objectives, which is where we are going to be spending a lot of our time in the seasonal loop. So, get Journey 2 done, glance through and pick whichever active modifier sounds the most appealing for you to use. This time around, our global modifier does not give us anything off the bat. You need to progress in the seasonal loop to begin gaining stats, so having an active slotted in at least gives us something, and again, it will let you begin completing those objectives on those next journey tiers, which is subsequently how you begin unlocking our passive modifiers for the season. So, with that done, our next destination is going to be the PVE Dark Zone. For week 1 of the season, when I'm making this guide, it is over in DZ West. However, this will rotate each week, so whenever you are watching this or whenever you're jumping in, look for the Dark Zone with the green hazard icon over top it. One very important thing to note before we step in, however, when you enter into the PVE Toxic Dark Zone, PvP normalization rules will still apply. And while we will cover specific build recommendations later on in the video, it is very important to remember that you should double check whatever build you plan on taking in to this zone so that you can see how its talents and abilities may get altered. To do that, from your inventory screen, you're going to want to click View PvP Stats at the bottom, and this will dynamically update the descriptions of any talent, gear set, or exotic that receives PvP changes. This has been a very controversial thing so far this season, given that PvP is not active within this dark zone, but it is a thing, at least for now, so it's good to be aware of it. With that sorted, though, you can now head over to the Toxic DZ and enter in. When you do, there are 2 things that you're likely going to notice right away, and those are these 2 UI elements underneath the radar. The first of those is your toxicity meter. This shows you a number readout as well as a slowly filling bar with 5 distinct notches. To know what that corresponds to, at any time you can go into your map, and whenever you hover over the Toxic DZ, you'll see this chart that lays out toxicity debuffs. If you are within the PVE DZ, it will illuminate these tiers in green if you are actively being affected by them. If not, they'll be grayed out. But as you will see at the bottom, you passively accumulate 4 toxicity stacks every 10 seconds that you are within this zone, and as that total grows higher and higher, you get inflicted by increasingly detrimental debuffs. So, for example, if you look over and see that you have 3 bars filled on your toxicity meter, by referring back to the chart, this means that you are actively receiving a 15% penalty to reload speed and weapon handling, a 30% penalty to your hazard protection, as well as taking 20% increased damage. So, hopefully you get the idea there. The natural next question then becomes, okay, how do I reduce or cleanse my toxicity? Well, this is where we get to another one of the main pain points for the season so far that people have identified. In the testing phases for this update, you could simply enter into a dark zone checkpoint and you would be cleansed, but currently entering entering a checkpoint or safe house will only pause your toxicity buildup. The only ways to actually fully cleanse this are to die, which is unideal if you have contaminated loot on you, or to leave the PVE dark zone entirely, either by going back out into the open world, or you can fast travel from one checkpoint to another, but notably this cannot be done while contaminated loot is on you or it gets destroyed. Now, it is important to note that surged active modifiers will reduce your toxicity meter on each use, and we'll cover exactly what those are and how to do it a bit later, but yeah, there's no easy way to keep this counter down without leaving a PvE Dark Zone session entirely, which feels weirdly anti-immersion to me. I think it would have been cool if there was either a built-in mechanic, maybe akin to how you buy off a manhunt in the PvP Dark Zones, or have it be so that a successful extraction cleanses the person who called it in. I don't know, but that's what we've got for now. The other thing you will then see when entering into the PvE Dark Zone is what alert level the zone is, and this refers to how many other players are actively within your server, and it dictates what difficulty scaling the NPCs get set to. If it's just you, for example, maybe you and one other person in the server, then the alert level is likely going to be at 1 and things shouldn't be too difficult. But if you get 8, 9, 10, 12 people in there, the alert level rises, and if you see it at alert level 3 or 4 when you enter in, your best bet is going to be to try and locate the other players in the server and farm together to take on the increased threat, as you're going to find that the NPCs are noticeably tankier and more lethal. Okay, so you now understand those two mechanics of the zone, but what do you do while you're in here? Well, I'm assuming you at least know the basics of the Dark Zone loop. You clear landmarks, you pick up contaminated loot in your bag, you then head to extraction points to get it out. That's all the same here, and it's also worth noting that seasonal progression is not the only worthwhile pursuit in here. DZ resources now have added value as the DZ vendors offer better rewards at lower costs. Exotic components are also reigning across all Dark Zones. The PVE DZ specifically has a 25% chance to drop one per DZ chest, and then hunters offer you a guaranteed exotic component alongside a 2% chance at an Eagle Bear or Ravenous. So all of those are good rewards and should ideally be managed alongside your season stuff to maximize your time, but to focus on the season stuff in particular, as that is what this guide is ultimately about. As you go through the toxic Dark Zone and take out enemies, you will notice these blue sample canister resources dropping. Upon walking over these, they will go directly into your inventory and do not require extraction, and these are your primary seasonal currency, so they are very important to pay attention to. It is worth noting, however, that if you really don't want to play within the PvE Dark Zone this season, you do have two alternatives for farming sample canisters. One of those is the PvP Dark Zones. You will also get direct to inventory drops in here that are actually at double the value per stack, so that's a pretty lucrative option. The other, though, is then from Retaliation. This season we have a new kill squad variant called the Knock Knock Gang, replacing BTSU Team 9 from last season. As far as I know, these guys have a chance to spawn during any faction's retaliation, but if you do get them to spawn and you take them down, one of the rewards for elimination is a bundle of 30 sample canisters. So, obviously much less consistent to get those guys to spawn in, but a fairly sizable reward in return. That all being said, the PvE Dark Zone does remain the best spot to farm sample canisters, because alongside the ground pickups that you will get, you also have a chance to grab sample canister caches from Dark Zone chests. Now, these come in blue, purple, and gold rarities, those offering you 15, 30, and 60 sample canisters respectively upon opening them, and these are what will really rack you up canister currency as you play. Do note that these caches are contaminated, however, and are required to be extracted before you can open them. A couple of notes on these and acquiring them. If it was not clear from the toxicity debuffs, the alert level mechanic, the PVE DZ is structured in such a way that it incentivizes people to seek one another out and farm together, and one really positive effect contributing to that is the fact that within this Dark Zone, if somebody spends DZ keys to open up a chest, then all all players in the vicinity, even if you're not grouped up with that person, will still get loot out of it. This also applies to DZ supply drops. Fun fact. The point here though is that if you are solo, then definitely be sure to pop these chests open to try and score some canister caches. Or if you are running alongside others, then be sure to check to see if someone else has opened it so as not to miss your drops, and maybe repay the favor once every few landmarks by spending one of your keys. In the event that you do not have any Dark Zone keys or you're unsure of how to get them, there are a variety of different sources. Landmark bosses and maybe some regular enemies as well can drop them. DZ chests themselves can sometimes give them back to you, and then there are certain other loot crates in the DZ that will sometimes pot them out. Also, extraction hunters within the toxic DZ have a high chance to drop them. They're good for a lot of things this season, but I digress. You are collecting your canisters, you've got canister caches in your contaminated bag, and let's say you decide it's time to extract. Well, not so fast. In order to call in an extraction, you need what is called a stabilization agent. And this can drop from two places. For one, you do have a chance to get them from DZ chests, so even more reasons to open those up. Or they also have a chance to drop from landmark bosses. Once you do acquire one of these, they go straight into a resource pouch and can be held indefinitely. You could leave the Dark Zone entirely, log off, come back 3 days later, and it'll still be there to use. However, you can only hold one of these at a time, so plan accordingly. That said, a stabilization agent is only needed if you yourself need to or plan to call in the extraction. If you are running in a group who calls one, or you see one ping on your map, you can freely extract your loot off of someone else's called extraction. On the note of extractions, you've likely heard me mentioning by now that hunters spawn in when an extraction is called. The number of hunters that spawn in is dictated by how many people are in the area when the flare is fired off, whereas the individual difficulty of each hunter is determined by the alert level of the zone, like all other NPCs. So just keep those two factors in mind when you're about to extract and are anticipating what kind of fight will await you. Now, something to keep in mind when extracting, specifically when there are other players in your PVE DZ server or are around you when you go to extract. There have been reports coming in that some players are abusing the way that hunters work in order to get other agents killed, and then in turn they steal your loot to extract for themselves. If you didn't know already, when you die within the PVE DZ while having items in your contaminated bag, those will drop on the ground for anyone to claim, so it's important to play as cautiously as you can to avoid that from happening. But with extraction specifically, hunters hack our shade skills quite easily. You may have noticed this in modes like Countdown. If a hunter hacks a turret or a drone, that will turn on your team and start wiping people out. The problem now in the PVE Dark Zone is that there is incentive to intentionally engage in that behavior, throw out a deployable skill, let it get hacked, watch other players die, then they take out the hunters themselves, scoop up all the loot, and profit. Now, the game director has commented that they are monitoring this behavior and looking into potential changes, but just keep it in the back of your mind to stay extra vigilant for if somebody around you may plan on engaging in this behavior, at least until some kind of change is made here. So, at this point, extraction completed, either by having called it in yourself with a stabilization agent, or you joined onto someone else's. You've now completed your first full run of the Toxic Dark Zone. Congratulations. Now, what do we do with all of those sample canisters that we've collected? So, you're going to want to return to the base, and if you've not played the DZ before, do note that all extracted contaminated loot must be grabbed out of the stash. It will not appear automatically in your inventory. But before opening up any of the canister caches that you may have collected, you're going to want to first visit this bench right beside the specialization coordinator. This is where the magic happens, if you will. It's where you have the ability to turn in your sample canisters in order to progress your global modifier and start earning stat upgrades from it. So you'll see that you have the option to turn in bundles of 5, 30, or 90 canisters at a time, and each trade-in that you perform does two distinct things. For one, it will permanently raise your sample size amount, which is tracked here, for the remainder of the season, meaning, given you turn in enough canisters, eventually you will max out this bar and be done. But in addition, each trade-in also gives you amounts of high-quality munitions, and these are a resource which consumes one for every reload you perform. It's essentially a form of special ammo, ammo, right? And what that special ammo grants you depends on how high your sample size is, shown on the chart here. The more canisters you trade in, the higher tiers of sample size you unlock, and those unlocked tiers automatically mean that the high quality munitions you use grant you more buffs, scaling all the way up to 15% damage to armor and rate of fire at the two highest tiers, as you can see. But again, whereas sample size is a permanent unlock, high quality munitions get consumed over time, meaning there is an incentive and a gameplay loop here to continue farming sample canisters throughout the season and continue trading them in to top off on munitions so that you can score on those free stat boosts. We will come back to munitions consumption in a moment, as there are some interesting things to note there. But first, before you begin trading in your canisters and opening up canister caches, I need you to note these two numbers down here. These show you how many high quality munitions and sample canisters you currently have on your character. It's also worth noting that you can check at any time how much of these you have. They appear on the very right side of your HUD when modifiers are enabled. The top number are your munitions, whereas the bottom are your sample canisters. A very important stipulation, though, that is not made very apparent in this season's UI, and I've already seen this tripping a number of people up. These two resources have caps. Sample canisters cap out at 90, whereas high quality munitions cap out at 400, although that can be increased to 600 with use of a specific passive modifier. So that means that if you are not paying attention, you can very easily overcap and leave resources sitting on the floor that you then can't use. Now, some people I've seen are taking more issue with this than others. I've seen some be like, I won't trade in any canisters until I'm out of munitions so as not to lose out. I personally think it is pretty easy to rack up 300, 600 munitions from trade-ins. It equates to like a 15-minute farm in the Toxic Dark Zone. So I don't mind leaving a bunch on the ground here for the convenience of turning in all my canisters at once, but that is a choice each of you will have to make, so just keep that in mind. The important one, though, in my view, is that the canister cap is 90, and so that means that you do not want to open all of your canister caches if you're already at 90. As to the best of my knowledge, these do not overflow and drop on the ground for later collection. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong there, but I was not able to observe that happening. So that means they are going to have wasted a bunch of time farming if you pop these things open too early. My advice is to get to 90 canisters by collecting ground pickups in the DZ, or if you're maybe just a few away, only open one of the blue quality canister caches so that you're overflowing as minimally as possible. At that point, you then want to buy the 90 trade in for maximum sample size gain, and then you can proceed with opening up your earned canister caches. Just be sure to do them in intervals that make sense. For example, one gold and purple one will get you to 90. You can then go and trade those in. Once you run out of gold ones, 3 purples get you to 90. Trade in again. If you've only got blues, 6 of those should get you to 90. You get the idea. Open them in whatever configuration works best for what you currently have. Just take a second to think about it before you do. So once you've done all of that, you've pretty much got the loop down. If you want to continue increasing your sample size, you can head back into the PVE Dark Zone and continue farming canisters for trade-in. I should note at this point that it's important to know that while sample size is a one-time grind, there is a secondary consumable purpose for sample canisters besides just trading them in at the base, and that is via your active modifiers. If you look at their description, you'll note that each one has a secondary surge description, and as the top line says, so long as you have enough sample canisters in your inventory, then it will automatically draw from that pool to surge your ability and give it extra effects. So much like munitions, there is an incentive to continue grinding throughout the season and remain topped off. However, unlike those, you can choose to fully ignore these surge effects if you wish, as the active modifier ability itself will continue to work regardless of if you have any sample canisters or not. So yeah, at this point you can continue engaging in the seasonal loop, or you can take your freshly scored high quality munitions out elsewhere in the game. That is one misconception that I've seen floating around, is that the seasonal modifiers in this update only work within the PVE DZ. That is not the case. You can take them out anywhere where modifiers are usually permitted. Some of them do have additional enhancements when used within the PVE Dark Zone specifically, but those are outlined in their descriptions. Whatever you end up doing next, last, just don't forget to check back in on your seasonal journey progress in order to start unlocking the available passive modifiers, as between those, your upgraded active modifiers and scaling the buffs given to you from high quality munitions, that is how you're going to be making the most out of the modifier suite in this season. Now, before we move on to a specific build recommendation for this season in PVE Dark Zone Farming, I wanted to circle back to the notion of high quality munitions being a consumable resource. This caveat that I'm about to show you has already been discovered and noted by many within the community. You may very well already be aware of this yourself, but it is a very important mechanic to be aware of for whenever you're theory crafting a build involving modifiers this season. So, as per the global modifier description, reloading any weapon will consume 1 stack of high quality munitions from your inventory. The catch, though, is that this actually means any manual reload, meaning if you have an exotic, a talent, anything that avoids you popping a new mag into your weapon, then no munitions will be taken from your reserves. So this has already led to many people theory crafting their ways around this. The Bullet King is an easy one. If you never have to reload, then you'll never consume any munitions. The Ninja Bike knee pads is one that I rarely see people use, but you can either vault over something or perform a cover to cover to reload your drawn weapon. Or the one that I've incorporated into my own build that we'll take a look at in a moment is the Whiplash from this last season's climax mission. With a large magazine LMG as my primary, I have plenty of time to let the Whiplash prime itself, and then when I'm low on ammo, I can swap to it, swap back, and I'm ready to go with no munitions consumed. So there's plenty of talents here that can achieve a similar result. I just wanted to inform you that if you don't care to go back and farm more and more munitions throughout the season, yet you still want to take advantage of the modifiers, you can build into being able to avoid the consumable restriction. Alright, well, before we close out, I'm sure that many of you will either be asking what build you saw me using in this video's gameplay, or if I just have any recommendations for this season and its new modifiers. And while it is entirely possible that I'll come up with more good and synergistic loadouts down the line, we are only like a day and a half into this season from when I'm making this. At the very least, I wanted to give you one decent example of a build I found that not only operates well within the PvE Dark Zone under the PvP normalization conditions, but also then pairs well with the modifiers at our disposal. So this is the loadout right here. We will dive into the modifiers right after, but as you can see, this is a pretty basic ongoing directive setup. What drew me to the set to begin with is the fact that it hardly gets changed between PvE and PvP conditions. I would guess likely because of its 4-piece talents on kill nature. The chest piece damage does get lowered by a little bit, but it still worked plenty well for me. And while this of course will have maximum benefit in a group setting for the shared hollow point rounds, it also works plenty fine solo, or you can use it as an excuse to make some friends and group up while you're in the PVE DZ. Do as you like. But yeah, now, you may ask why use stuff like the Catalyst or the Anarchists over a brand like Cheska to bump up our crit hit chance. Well, that is entirely because of our modifiers, so let's switch on over to those. To begin, I'm using Invincible as my active. I tried to resist at first, but for DPS, it just clears Numa so hard, I think. If you have not tried it yet, it is basically just a souped up version of Zealot from a couple of seasons ago. It's very strong. You become unkillable for its duration, plus getting extra movement speed and damage. If you do plan to run this, though, have a revive hive on you, because much like Tenacity from the Eagle Bear, you will accidentally kill yourself when the timer runs out. As for the passives, first I have Inoculated. This one is just nice to make the toxicity mechanic in the PVE DZ less cumbersome, especially given the lack of cleansing options. That said, this will of course only apply if you are playing within the PVE DZ, so elsewhere I would say Surge Drive can be nice to not deplete your sample canister count quite as quickly, or if you want even more damage, Contagion is very strong. This one could be good on Legendary or Escalation. Alright, then I have Spark and Flame, and this is where really the entire idea for this build really tied together. This gives you 30% free status effects, but then also, when you're within the PvE Dark Zone, it grants you 2% weapon damage for every 10% status on your build. Now, when I read this one, it immediately got me thinking, what combines damage and status effects in a way that would make this work? And that is when I landed on Ongoing Directive, so here we are. But between this modifier, the gear set bonus, the Golan brand, all of those combined, I think I'm getting over 16% free damage from this perk. This is the reason why I'm also running the Catalyst exotic. I get to build stacks by dishing out status effects, which we're doing via hollow point ammo. But then the bonuses that it's giving me in return provide double value, right? Because status effects make the bleed more potent and further contributes to my weapon damage on top of the inherent damage bonus that it is giving. So all in all, lots of synergy with this one. I've enjoyed it quite a bit. Lastly, I then have Unfriendly Fire, which is making its return from Year 7 Season 2. It's very fitting for a hyena themed season, and I just think this is too fun not to run, really. Hyena shield combatants can be infamously annoying, so to be able to ricochet shots around the room off of them is very satisfying. That said, once again, Contagion is another fantastic damage boosting mod if you'd rather run that. Well, there you have it, everybody. That is your guide on Into the Dark overall, really, between the PVE Dark Zone, the modifiers, the seasonal loop, the build crafting. Hopefully this helps you get oriented in this new season. I know there's been a lot of different questions coming in from a lot of different angles, so I tried to cover everything in this one video. At this point though, if you have further questions about how this season works, about anything that we covered today, certainly let me know. I'll do my very best to clear things up. I would also love to hear your thoughts on the season overall so far. How are you finding the PVE Dark Zone? How are you finding the modifiers? Anything in between. And then lastly, if you have any build ideas so far that you've come up with to synergize with the modifiers, certainly let me know. I'm sure there's a lot out there and I always enjoy seeing people's creativity. But yeah, that's just about everything that I've got for today, folks. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I hope to catch you back soon, but until then, RogueGold out. Oh! We just got a Ravenous! Haha! I might not be friendly. Let's go.
Coming to the Division 2.
Let's go!
And